Egyptian Museum was established in 1900. It is by far the most valuable museum of Egyptian antiquities in the world. Located at the heart of Cairo, it is within walking distance of most of the leading hotels in the city. The museum is divided into galleries exhibiting items from various periods in more or less chronological order, moving clockwise along the ground floor. They start with the 4th dynasty, about 2700 BC, and move into the Middle State and the Modern State, which includes the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties. Perhaps the most impressive sight on the ground floor is a room devoted to Akhenaten and all that was buried with him. The first floor holds the famous mummy room where the body of King Tutankhamun can be seen. This floor also contains mummies of the following kings: Saknan Ra, the founder of the 18th dynasty, Amenhotep I, Merit Amun, Thutmose II, Thutmose IV, Seti I, Ramses II, Merenbata, and Ramses V. The upper floor also contains an area where the treasures of Tutankhamun are exhibited. All the items exhibited here come from the tomb found in the Valley of the Kings at Thebes and what is now Luxor. Number 62. King Tutankhamun was only 16 years old when he died. He was a powerful king, but is known for his efforts in trying to change religious beliefs. His tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, is very famous because it is the only one in the Valley of the Kings to have been safe from the hands of grave robbers. It had only been robbed twice, and therefore most of the treasure was still there when the tomb was discovered, most of which were transported to the Egyptian Museum. The tomb consists of a 16-step ladder leading to a long passage leading to the largest room in the tomb. Towards the east, we find a door leading to a smaller room. Both the small and the large rooms were overstuffed with furniture belonging to King Tut. Then we reach the burial room, in which we find the stone coffin and the wooden one which contained the king's mummy. This wooden coffin, which is covered by a thin layer of gold, is considered the most wonderful creation of the ancient Egyptian artist. The drawings and inscriptions of the tomb are confined to the burial room. They represent the king's funeral and the different offering scenes done by the king to the gods. The pyramids were constructed upon a religious belief of the pharaohs that the dead would one day rise again and get a chance at a second life. The pyramid was built to be burial place for the king. Inside, it provided him with clothes, jewelry, food, shelter, etc. for his afterlife. The inside of the pyramid, made with such accuracy, shows the excellence and advanced architecture of the pharaohs. The Giza pyramids were made in descending order of age and size. Cheops is the largest. Khephren, his son, is smaller. Mykines belongs to the grandson, is the smallest of the three. All three of them are positioned at 8.5 degrees west of magnetic north. The Great Sphinx, with the body of a kneeling lion and the head of a man, was built during Khepren's time. Indeed, the Sphinx face is thought to have been built in the image of Khephren. Unfortunately, much of this monument has either been eroded or deliberately destroyed over the years. Facial features such as the nose and the beard are no longer intact. Saqqara, stepped pyramid. Imhotep, an Egyptian architect who lived 4,500 years ago, is the one who built this fabulous step pyramid. He began the pyramid as a single story, then added 5 more levels. He then covered it with fine limestone. In front of the pyramid, he built a stone structure which contains a wooden box with 2 peepholes. If you look through it, one may view a life-size painting statue of King Zoser. The reason behind this is to allow the king's Ka, or life spirit, to communicate with the outside world. The Karnak site is situated about 3.5 kilometers from the Luxor Temple and is the largest of its kind in the world. The circumference of this temple measures about 4 kilometers within the Karnak site. Perhaps the largest temple within the Karnak is that of Amun, a great pharaonic god. A processional path of ram sphinxes representing Amun lead into the temple. Between the forelegs of these rams is a small statue of Ramses II, Amun's servant. Though the temple was originally founded during the Middle Kingdom, the various dynasties that came afterwards continued to add onto it, hence the size of this massive temple. From the highest wall of the temple, we see the great front yard, which was built by Ethiopians, Shashank Gate, and the Hall of Columns, which was established by King Ramses II. Just behind these great walls lies the obelisk built by Queen Hatshepsut, then the granite temple and the feast hall established by King Thutmose III. On the far horizon appears the Holy Lake, the remains of Osiris's tomb, the series of the southern walls, the temple of the infant god Khonsu, and Obet Temple.
center of Luxor, separated from the Nile by a paved way whose traces are still under the main street of the city, Luxor Temple extends. It was built to be a secret settlement of the lords of gods, namely Amun, who took the figure of Min, the god of fertility and reproduction in Egyptian mythology. The Luxor Temple was built by Amenhotep III in the 18th dynasty, who at the time was referred to as the Magnificent. Amenhotep III spent virtually all of his wealth on constructing great monuments and had an undying love for architecture. Once every year, a great feast was held to transport the statue of god Amun from the Karnak Temple through the river to visit Luxor Temple, which was called the Southern Harem. The temple is marked by its rear rooms with the prominent inscriptions and hall of columns whose crowns are represented in the figure of lotus. Afterwards, King Ramses II added a front yard made of the beautiful sandstone in front of the harem. He also surrounded it with rows of columns, decorated it with statues made of granite or Aswan stone, and established in front of the temple a great palace ornamented by 2 granite obelisks, one of which was transferred to Concord Square in 1836. It is quite strange that one of the Muslim rulers, called the Ibn el-Hagag, established for himself a small mosque inside of the Luxor temple. One of the beautiful scenes tourists are keen to watch here at the Luxor temple is the celebration of the birth of Ibn el-Hagag. About 7 kilometers from the Nile on the west bank and must have been one of the most amazing discoveries made in Egypt. It was here that the bodies of kings such as Tutankhamun, Ramses II, Ramses IV, Thutmose III, and many other kings once lay. The idea for building this kind of burial ground is thought to have originated with the pharaoh Thutmose I, who, owing to the frequency of tomb robbings, even in those days, decided to have his tomb concealed in a place far away from his mortuary temple and not near the temple as past pharaohs had been doing. The pharaohs that followed did the same, hence changing a tradition that had been going on for close to 2,000 years. Within the tombs and along the walls, the inscriptions from the Book for the Dead provided instructions for how the pharaoh may have a safe trip to the next world and how to avoid the dangers that lay on the way. Although not all the tombs are always open to visitors, the more interesting ones usually are. These tombs are also electrically lighted and give a more impressive image exposing more of the artistic detail. The tombs in the Valley of the Kings belong to the 18th, 19th, and 20th families. There are 62 tombs, including some small tombs which are not considered royal. The total of tombs that can be visited are 17. Some of them are really worth visiting, such as tomb number 62, belonging to King Tutankhamun, and number 35, belonging to King Amenhotep II, for they are characterized by their lovely entrances, passages, and their colorful drawings. Tomb number 17, which belongs to King Seti I, is considered the most beautiful tomb in the whole valley. Tomb number 8 is King Merenbetaz and is marked by its beautiful coffin and unique drawings. Tomb number 11, belonging to King Ramses III, is known for its splendor and luxury. Tomb number 9, which belongs to Ramses V, was seized by King Ramses VI and is considered a good example of Ramses's late art. Tomb number 6, which is the tomb of King Ramses IX, is the last tomb built in the valley.
short distance from the Valley of the Kings lies the Valley of the Queens. It lies at the southern end of Theban Cemetery and includes a number of royal tombs belonging to the 19th and 20th families. The total number of these tombs is 70, yet most of them are unimportant, void of writings or inscriptions. This valley can be reached either through Habbo town or its cathedral. As far as we know, King Ramses I from the 19th family was the first to build a tomb for his wife in the Valley of the Queens. This is a tomb number 38, which belongs to Set Ra. King Ramses II also buried his wife, the beautiful Nefertari, there along with the three of his daughters. The funerary shrines of the nobility of Thebes are the most amazing in all of Egypt. Although most of them were stolen or spoiled by those who inhabited them, there is a great difference between the tombs of the nobility and those of royalty. Being a god himself, the pharaoh needed to put drawings of himself, picturing his active life and earthly joys, on the walls of his tomb to ensure enjoying them in his afterlife. On the other hand, the nobility were not gifted with such powers in the afterworld. Thus, the walls of their tomb pictured their normal life to be restored by the deceased through magic in the afterworld. Temple of Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut, the only woman ever to rule as a pharaoh, set up her own mortuary temple and followed her father's example of having the temple built to better secure her body. The temple was built during the 18th dynasty on the west bank at the north end of the necropolis, about 6 kilometers from the river, and consists mainly of 3 terraces linked by ramps. Is the huge mortuary temple of King Ramses II. Unfortunately, it is little more than a ruin today, but a huge fallen statue of the king is impressive in its own right. The temple itself was architecturally quite complicated and displays the typical intricacy and architectural genius that temples and monuments built by this great pharaoh were well renowned for. Rumesum lies on the west bank, 5 kilometers from the Nile, and at the heart of the necropolis. Embassy of Memnon. These two statues of Amenhotep III originally sat in front of the mortuary temple of the king. Unfortunately, this temple was destroyed throughout the centuries. It is believed that it was built on white sandstone, gold, and silver. The statues show Amenhotep seated on his throne with the two Nile gods of Upper and Lower Egypt uniting the two lands on his side. Esna Temple. Esna is located on the left bank of the River Nile, about 55 kilometers south of Luxor. This temple was built by the Greek and Roman rulers, and it was dedicated to the ram-headed god Khnum. Temple of Horus, Edfu. Edfu was an important city in Upper Egypt, lying on the left bank of the Nile about 100 kilometers south from Luxor. During the reign of the Old State, Edfu, the capital of the second province in Upper Egypt, enjoyed enormous prosperity. Nowadays, this city is known by its grand temple, which is devoted to the worship of the great god of the heavens, Falcon, Horus, the god of Baholt town. This temple is considered one of the most important religious monuments in Egypt. During the reign of King Ptolemy III, the construction of Edfu Temple began, yet it was not finished until 57 BC, because of some intrigues and plots hatched at Thebes at that time. The length of the temple is 137 meters, while its width is 79 meters, and its height is 376 meters. Tourists are undoubtedly fascinated by the wonderful condition of the perfectly preserved temple. Its buildings, ceilings, halls, etc. are all complete and intact, so that one might imagine seeing the priests and their assistants in their snow-white robes wandering here and there. Furthermore, the temple is surrounded by a number of secondary buildings attached to the temple, such as the Mamasi. It is noteworthy that the temple is characterized by an enormous quantity of inscriptions covering the walls. Aswan was once used as a rich source of granite for the construction of temples and colossi. Perhaps one of the most interesting features of Aswan is the necropolis located on the west bank of the Nile, containing about 40 tombs, which go back to the 3rd millennium BC. Only a few kilometers from Aswan, amidst the Nile waters, lies the island of Sahel. Large granite rocks on the island bear inscriptions celebrating the passage of various royal dignitaries. Another island, known as the island of Philae, held temples dedicated to Isis and Horus, and another dedicated to Hathor. These temples had to be moved when the Nile waters began to submerge the island owing to the old and high dams of Egypt. Today the temples are safe on the island of Agalkia, where they can be visited and seen as they were. The late leader of the Ismailis, Aga Khan III, chose to be buried here in this simple yet beautiful mausoleum. The Ismailis were a Shiite sect originating in India. His wealth was phenomenal, as was his obesity. On his 75th birthday, 1945, he distributed his weight in diamonds among his followers. He preferred to live in Aswan because of the cool winter climate. The mausoleum is an exquisite example of elegant Fatimid architecture. Transferred to the island of Agalkia and reshaped to resemble the old island, which was about to drown after the construction of the high dam. The present island was finally opened for visitors in 1980, after the finish of this massive project, which lasted for 10 years. The monuments at the temple belong to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. The three principal monuments are the Kiosk of Trajan, the Temple of Hathor, and the Temple of Isis. At the Kiosk of Trajan, drawings shown Trajan offering incense and wine to Isis, Horus, and Osiris. The Temple of Hathor lies on the east side of the island. Built during the Ptolemaic period and decorated by Augustus. The temple shows carvings of music and drinking, for Hathor was a symbol of fertility and identified by the Greeks as the goddess of love. The third temple, the Temple of Isis, is the largest and most important among the complex of temples. It occupies about 1/4 of the island. The walls are covered with scenes of Ptolemaic kings, Roman emperors, performing the customary ceremonies. Later, when this temple became a church, Christians added their crosses to the stones. 320 kilometers outside of Aswan, in Nubia, lies Abu Simbel temple carved directly out of the sandstone cliffs along the Nile. The fascinating temple that lies here was built by Ramses II. Although it was really built for his own glorification, theoretically the temple was dedicated to the gods Amun-Ra, Harmakis, and Ptah. The face of the temple consists of 4 huge statues of King Ramses seated on his throne, each statue being 20 meters high, 4 meters from ear to ear, and 1 meter across the mouth. The statues of the 3 to whom the temple was dedicated once stood at the heart of the mountain out of which this temple was carved. Interestingly, twice a year the sun would penetrate the entrance of the temple into the mountain and shine on Amun-Ra and a statue of Ramses II. It would then move to shine on Harmakis about 20 minutes later, but fail to shine on Ptah, who was, in fact, the god of darkness. In the temple's yard, there is a group of monuments, the most important of which is the famous marital monument, on which is registered the story of the marriage of the pharaoh and the daughter of the Hittite king, after signing the first peace treaty in the world between Egypt and Khita. In the halls of columns there are 8 huge pillars on which is sculptured the statue of the king taking the figure Osiris, the god of the dead. This hall is also known for its northern wall, on which is represented the Kadesh battle, which was difficultly won by the king. As to the southern wall, it also has a dazzling scene representing the king with his sons attacking the Syrian citadel, and at the bottom of the picture we find a shepherd trying to escape the victorious king. Just beside this scene, the king is pictured again holding one enemy in one hand and stabbing him with the other. This specific scene is remarkable because the enemy appears to be the same size as the king, while in other scenes enemies were usually humiliated by being smaller than the king. The Temple of Abu Simbel contains other scenes of no less importance than the former, such as the scene of the king with his lion and other featuring the priests. Nefertari's temple. This temple, which is located northward from the Great Temple, is also dug in the rock and is dedicated to the goddess Hathor and the queen Nefertari. The facade of the temple has 6 huge statues, 4 of which represent the king and the other 2 for the queen in the shape of Hathor. The walls of the halls are decorated with different scenes and inscriptions representing the different goddesses, particularly Queen Nefertari.